You did it. There's a hand start. Okay, today I have the great pleasure of having Alan Travis show me and give me a ride in his 1913 Bugatti Type 22 Torpedo, I think. Is that right? Okay. It's the Type 22 Torpedo 1913 Bugatti. This is a very important car and a fun car to go for a ride in, I promise. And taking you along, let's learn about the history, the engineering, and a lot of the other features about this car that nobody knows until now.
Okay, we'll cover the dash of the Bugatti now, the cockpit. So you have your altimeter, your motor Android, so you can adjust your carburetor. Mm-hmm. You have your battery gauge. It shows you how much is in your battery. Mm-hmm. What does your battery look like?
I have no idea. I'm glad you decided to bring that up.
Okay, well, your battery's in here.
Ah, okay.
So X-side, right? Okay.
Wow.
So your battery is 4 telephone batteries. Huh. That's your battery.
Wow.
So your battery, what was that used for? It's got a magneto. So the battery is used for your headlights. So your headlights are original. They're electric. Electric headlights, the first year of those was basically 1913. The 1912 and earlier cars had carbide, and water would generate acetylene gas. So this is the first year of electric headlights. So the headlights themselves are brass, which was the last year of brass headlights was about 1913 because they went to nickel after that.
Okay.
And it's the first year of electric headlights.
Right.
So this has the original brass light with electric bulbs, and these bulbs are the original bulbs, with the original Mazda bulbs from 1913.
Are you kidding? Wow.
And they still work.
That's fascinating. So we're catching right at the transition out of brass to, and also the transition to electricity.
Yes.
Right in this time.
So that's really all that the battery would be used for.
Okay, so it didn't try to charge from the magneto at all.
They don't charge from the magneto. Did I put, which it didn't come with, an electric starter? Yes, I did. So you'll see that when we start it. I'll either hand crank it or I'll use the starter. It's been a few months since I've run this car, so I'm going to use the electric starter. Mm-hmm. So that's not first person historically real. Okay. I put that in, and I put it in without modifying anything. But it's a crank start racing car, which is what that is in the front.
Well, I want to ask you a leading question for why you might do that, and that is a lot of cars of this era are strictly museum cars, and they just sit, and who cares if it's got a starter?
Yeah.
But you drive your cars, don't you?
I drive it everywhere. I've probably, after I spent 3,500 hours restoring this, I've probably driven it more than 10,000 hours. I've raced it at Watkins Glen, at Lime Rock, at Sonoma, at Laguna Seca. I've driven it on 1,000-mile tours. I've gone on off-road, small off-road reliability trips with it. We've driven it to pickleball. You know, I drive it. All my cars, I drive them. If you're driving a car and you keep it perfect, and you're in a group and everybody's got a more modern car, i.e. electric starters, they say they're going to leave at 1 o'clock. But when they get to their cars, they're out there at 12:50, and all of a sudden somebody starts their car and they're all gone. And then I can be hand cranking it, and then I'll get it started, but they're already there. So sometimes it's okay just to have electric starter so I can get there quick too. Right. Because if you give me a chance, if I start with other people, I can stay up with them. Right. Because nobody has a car older than me, generally. Uh-huh. So well, you got a Bugatti, you should keep up with me. Yeah, but it took me 3 minutes to get it started, and you're already 3 minutes down the road.
That's right. That's an unfair advantage.
The design of the cockpit, we can go back to it.
Yeah.
So that's the battery voltage for the batteries there. Uh-huh. This is my fuel pump pressure, on how much pressure I have. Okay. So earlier we were talking, and I pumped the pump on the side.
Let's just have a look at that real quick.
Okay. That's the air pump. Okay. So the fuel pump that the car has is an air pump. So you pump a bar or half a bar or a bar and a half of pressure, which is a pound or two pressure in the gas tank, and that forces the fuel from the gas tank, which is here, to the motor.
Okay.
And how often do you have to pump it? You have to pump it every 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then when you see the gauge drop down to a quarter of a bar, you need to pump it again.
I got you.
It's not a big deal. And there's a vacuum tank that kind of stays up with it, and it kind of will if you're not really giving a lot of power, and if you're not floored going up a long Mount Lemmon type hill or something like that. So it works fine. So could you, if you had a 10-mile course, go ahead and pump it and pump it and pump it till you got the end of the gauge? You might be able to, but you're using a tank that's 110 years old, and it's going to burst the seams. So you keep a little bit of pressure in your gas tank so you can reliably make it to where you're going and back.
Right, fair enough.
Your ignition switch and your light switches are all that kind of switch, which is toggle switches from back then. This is the oil pressure switch, which is pretty interesting. Right now it's red flags. There's 4 of them on there. And as long as you have less than 5 pounds of oil pressure, i.e. not enough to run, you're going to have red flags. So if it's running, you better just hope you have your oil pressure. And then all of a sudden those red flags switch over to white flags. And when the white flags happen, you can go.
Okay.
But you have a pretty big carburetor and you just don't floor it then. You know, you kind of have your choke on a little bit. You still has to warm up a little bit.
Yep.
You know, everything is very, very mechanical in its operation.
Sure.
The shifter and the brakes are on the outside of the car. Every Bugatti is right-hand drive. Okay. And the reason they did that, this is as tiny a car as you could possibly have. You can't have a car with any dimension on the entire car smaller than it is for 6-foot people to ride in it and drive it. So if you had the shifter and the brakes between the 2 persons on the inside, you'd have to have the car another 6 or 8 inches wider. The whole thing.
I see. Okay.
So all Bugattis had their shifter and their brake on the outside.
Strictly a space-saving design.
Right.
Okay.
And it's a 4-speed on the outside. And the steering of the Bugatti is, you know, just a finger, and because it weighs nothing.
Yeah.
Aluminum body, aluminum transmission, aluminum rear end, mostly aluminum motor, aluminum everything, you know, and then bronze and brass everything else. And then that is the transmission. So it you know, gives you the race car feel. Because it's all, there's not a bunch of extra padding in the insulation anywhere.
Right, that's just literally, looks like a filler cap for the transmission right there. And then of course a panel on top. Wow, and can I ask, what is the linkage here?
This is the choke.
Okay.
And this is the timing.
Okay, all right. People want to set their carburetor to spec. Well, on these cars, you're setting the carburetor constantly, aren't you?
Yep. The non-carburetor side of the engine.
Okay.
One thing of note, this was a race car, so the exhaust manifold is a perfect nickel steel header system. Not tubing, cast nickel steel headers, equal length tubes as much as possible. Wow. Where this hooks up to the exhaust manifold, that's only a 1/2 of an inch between where the combustion happens. I mean, so the amount of the engine that gets heated is only about a 1/2 an inch.
Wow.
And the importance of that is, you notice the fan on the radiator? You don't?
I don't notice it.
It never has had a fan. It was designed without a fan. It's never had a fan. It's so efficient on the design, and it's 110 years old, and I live in Arizona, it never overheats without any fan at all, because the heat is carried away so efficiently from these headers.
So the engine just doesn't get very hot.
No, and that's just amazing. So the amount of water you're carrying is a lot less than you would think. The amount of horsepower you're draining from your small engine is less because you don't have a fan and you don't have any problems. You can make the engine compartment much tighter. You know, if an engine compartment has a fan in it, you know, it's another 6 inches longer. This is a purpose-built racing car as small as it can possibly be. You know, Mr. Lotus designed cars for lightness, every part of it. So if you design things like that, so this is like a Lotus, you know, it's 50 years before, you know, Colin did, before the Lotuses were around, this was the same design characteristics of a car. Make it as efficient as you could possibly make it. So this is a very complex valve in what it does, but it's simple. This is just simply an on-off valve, and there's the oil pump, and there's the center of the overhead valve ball bearing camshaft.
Okay.
The problem is, this is the oil pump, and this engine from the bottom down there, you know, it's 3 foot from the oil pump to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So if you let this run for a while till you had oil pressure, it would be a while, and you would do lots and lots of damage. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't be very responsible to your engine today or back then.
Sure, okay.
So this oil pump, you fill the oil pump here before you start it. So we're going to say it's been 6 months since I've started this.
Okay.
It's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna prepare this and we're gonna drive it. So what you do when you prepare it, you just don't start it. You simply, you pour your oil in here, and that's your oil pump, and then that's also the very beginning or the very end of your camshaft.
Right.
And you can tell it's your camshaft. The tack on the dash, that's the tack drive, which is right out the backside of the camshaft, which is what a Miller racing engine would have, you know, 10 years later for the Indy 500. Okay. It's coming right from that same camshaft.
Okay.
So you are filling this box with oil. And then you also notice petcocks. You see a petcock there and a petcock there.
I do, yeah.
And the petcocks are staggered a little bit, but more importantly, they're staggered from a height standpoint. Mm-hmm. So the bottom standpoint, the bottom petcock is what you need. You need to have at least your oil to that point.
To the bottom.
To the bottom. And your top checking point is because each time that you drive it, if it's been a while, you're priming the oil pump.
Okay.
So you're putting an amount of oil into that oil pump.
Okay.
So you're adding oil that the engine really didn't need, but if you didn't put it in, you wouldn't have any oil in your oil pump to circulate. So you put a beaker below it, and that's what I've got going right now.
Okay.
So there's the beaker from last night.
Oh, right.
So that means I haven't done it for a while.
Uh-huh.
So now I'm going to close the upper petcock.
Okay.
So now it's closed. So there's your lower, and there's your,
get a good shot of it here.
And there's your upper. So neither one drains a lot of oil out, but it does its purpose.
Right.
And you see that they're only a 3/4 of an inch difference on height each.
Yeah, I expected to see more difference, believe it or not. But
and you have to be on level ground.
Yeah.
So now I can strain this oil, since it might only have been used for 500 miles, and I can put it back in the engine if I want.
Yeah, but you had more than a quart.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Huh. You know, if you read the old magazines, they had every piece of information necessary to do a perfect job.
Yeah.
And they're the only ones in the world that had a car, so they're going to read their book.
Right. It was obviously important, and it was a big investment too.
Right, and they're not going to get a new car every 3 years.
Right.
Yet, you know, they made them for a lifetime. You know, this is a European car. European cars were made such that houses were 700 or 800 years old, 3-foot thick walls. So they made lifetime houses, not like we have. We tear them down every 20 years.
Right.
And cars, the same thing. Let's make a lifetime car. Let's make it out of bronze and brass and aluminum and nickel vanadium steel.
Right.
And, well, they're already, everything I have is over 100 years old, and they're still kind of perfect. So they should last a few hundred more years.
Yeah, you'd think, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, is it a pain? Yeah, it's a fun pain.
Okay.
But, so I'm going to fill.
So if I follow you, the top one is the overfill level.
Correct.
Okay.
So after you do your race or your set of 2 or 3 days worth of racing, you open your petcock on the top, and you drain off that oil.
Okay.
So this oil is probably used. It is used. I drain this out of the top. I strain it with a brass strainer.
Okay.
Because it's only been used for a few days.
Right.
So I'll pour it back in. So I'm going to do that right now. So now the oil is full. And that oil goes into the oil pump, into the gears, and it also goes a little bit into the camshaft.
Okay.
The oil that is right here there's a good amount of oil that's there right now. But again, a problem with oiling. There's also this portion of the engine, this portion of the engine, and that portion of the engine. So yes, we poured it in here and we're happy, but we shouldn't be, because the oil isn't into the back yet.
Okay.
So what is going to happen now? There's a petcock here.
Yep.
And this petcock goes to the center of the camshaft. On the center of the camshaft, there's an Archimedes screw. And the Archimedes screw is the oil that comes through these banjo fittings, goes into the Archimedes screw. So as soon as the engine is started, the Archimedes screw throws the oil to this portion of the cam box.
Sends it back. Okay.
And then there's drains that drain the oil from the cam box into the crankcase.
Okay.
So right now, if I turn this to this spot, it looks like I have no oil going through that. But on this petcock, there's a small hole drilled through the center of it, a small hole, so it always has flow there.
Okay.
But when you first start it, you open up the petcock. For the first minute, so the petcock has its normal big round hole for a minute. But you don't forget about that, because otherwise you'll fill the cam box completely with oil.
Right.
So for 1 minute, you have it open, and then you shut it back down, if it's been a while since you started it. If it's been of the same day, you don't have to do that, because there's already a bunch of oil back here.
Sure. Okay. It hasn't drained all back. Yeah.
So the last thing on this side is well, you can see the clutch very, very well. And the clutch is of a design that the clutch pressure is the same as the gas pedal pressure.
Really?
Every other antique car in this era, you might have 100 pounds of foot pressure. I mean, you're almost using both feet when you first push it down, because you have a leather cone clutch. This Bugatti has discs, and the discs are very small, and because of the moment arm, you have 3 ounces of pressure on the clutch pedal on this.
Wow.
None whatsoever. Why is that extra important? Because all of the engines that you're pushing a lot on, you're pushing on that engine, you're pushing on the flywheel, so that force has to be made up somewhere or another. Because the crankshaft, you know, it's in Babbitt, so you don't really want to have 100 pounds of pressure by pushing the clutch pedal
laterally on the, yeah, right.
So on the Bugatti, you have 3 ounces of pressure. So when you push the pedal in, you're not upsetting the balance or the bearings of the engine whatsoever, but every other car of the era you were.
Sure.
So everything is a tremendous amount of design went into every little piece of it.
Wow.
It's like you analyzed every ounce of the car and you made everything perfect.
Yeah, they didn't let anything just get bolted on without thinking about it.
So look at the clutch down there. Look at the actual.
Yeah. I can see that.
And you see why that would be no pressure?
Yeah. Now, how unusual was a disc clutch back in that day?
Virtually nothing had it.
Okay.
You know, I'll say that, and yes, there were some that had that.
Okay.
But on the same token, if they had discs, they still had 60 to 100 pounds of pressure. So you're pushing on the clutch pedal, which means you're pushing on the throwout bearing, which isn't really a bearing much in these cars. It's a brass that's sliding. It's another thing on this. You can put it with tiny ball bearings that are 1/8 of an inch diameter, because you're pushing it with 2 or 3 ounces of pressure.
Doesn't have to do much.
And you're not pushing it, the whole engine, the crankcase back and forth, the crankshaft back and forth.
Right.
You're pushing with so little pressure that you're not upsetting the balance of the poured Babbitt bearings on your crank.
Yeah.
So you're not hurting it any.
Right.
So, and you would never think you needed to design that, but when you think of what he did, that was perfect. I'm not going to do this, but I did this earlier before you got here.
Okay.
I also take this loose.
Okay.
And I push oil right into here, which puts it into the backside of the pump.
Okay.
So I have filled up, prior to you getting here, I filled up this tube.
So that's kind of priming the pump?
It's priming that too, so I just don't have any time whatsoever getting my red flags to switch to white flags.
Gotcha.
I want it to run no time whatsoever without oil pressure.
Very responsible of you.
So that's what this is for. That's the magneto, and that's what actually fires up the engine.
Okay.
And then this is my timing for my magneto. As I move the thing on the inside, my lever, I advance and retard my magneto.
Okay.
My spark plugs are non-resistor spark plugs. So if you touch these connections, you're going to get shocked. What are these right here? That's how you adjust the valves in a Bugatti.
Okay, and I notice they're on both sides.
They are, because you have valves on both sides.
You have the intake on one side and the exhaust on the other.
Yes,
okay.
And you have no rocker arms in a Bugatti. You have no push rods. You know, we discussed the scripts before in the videos from a few times before, and we had long push rods,
and you remade,
and we had rockers, and we made the push rods that came out of the engine better material, so we didn't pull the oil out.
Right. And
let's go to one other car on push rods real quick, so I can describe the difference.
Okay.
So this is the 1905 performance engine. Its push rods are 1/2 inch, 7/16 shanks that move up and down.
Wow.
There's a lot of meat down below too, and it's moving these derricks back and forth.
Yes, it is. Okay.
So the amount of weight that these push rods would have is a pound or so in each one of those.
Substantial. Yeah.
So that's from a heavy standpoint. From a design standpoint, this was a very powerful car, but not designed to be lightweight at all.
Right.
So we'll go back to the Bugatti.
Okay.
The only thing that's from the camshaft to the valves is a little banana tappet, about 1/2 inch long, about 1/4 inch in diameter. And that tappet goes through babbitt, pushing on the top of the valve straight down as it runs.
Okay.
I'll show you a picture later.
Okay, so the camshaft's almost directly moving the valves, and there's nothing else.
The valve is pushing on something weighing 10 grams, which is 1/4 of an ounce. So the entire valve train on a Bugatti is 1/4 of an ounce. So, and that's probably lighter than any car in the world has even today. Because that's all you have. And then that banana tappet is shaped like a banana, i.e. it's going from the camshaft and pushing directly down on the valve.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just compare the valves from the 1905 car to the Bugatti. The valves on the 1905 car, since it has a pound worth of mechanisms to actuate the valve, that spring needs to be 100 pounds on that valve, or it needs to be a lot.
Right.
Because it has to return a lot of mass back down again. And that mass is so much, even with your spring tension being as high as it is, you better keep the RPM 1500 RPM or so, because you're moving a lot of mass back and forth as that's running.
That's right.
The Bugatti, since it weighs 1/4 of an ounce, the entire valve train from the camshaft to the valve, it can have 30-pound valve springs, which is nothing, i.e. no friction, you're not wasting any horsepower making the valves go up and down. And 30 pounds is good enough for 4,000 or 5,000 RPM because of the design of the camshaft.
Wow.
And the camshaft is spinning in ball bearings, so there's just no load to it at all. There's just no load. It just woo, woo.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's designed as a race car. Yes, yes, yes.
So it's a free revving engine.
Really free revving engine.
Yeah.
So one thing interesting about the head that contains all the valve train on our valves and our overhead valve camshaft with all ball bearings, there's somebody's signature on it.
Yes, there is.
The very first cars that Mr Bugatti made, the very first, and just a few of them, 10 or 15 of them, had his signature on that. Mr Bugatti was involved in automotive history from 1898 when he ran his 1898 Didion Bouton racing trike. That's Mr Bugatti on his racing trike.
That's him. That's the man himself, huh?
So that was his first experience with automotive. He worked for a trike place and did modifications to those. So he called that Bugatti number 1. It was not his company. It was not his company, but that's all considered Bugatti number 1. And what that was one of these racing Didion explosion trikes. And I have the oldest one of those in the world. So this is a type, my Bugatti, which is the first one that's a Grand Prix designed or style car, is a Type 22 torpedo. It's not that he made 21 other cars when he made his company. He worked for 6 or 7 other companies, and he was, as he would work for those companies, making different models for those companies, I.D. Dietrich being one of them. That would be number 2, 3, and 4, and so on. So the first ones that he made for himself had higher numbers because he counted everything else he did for other companies.
Okay, so it's kind of his body of work, you might say.
Yep. So, but this was the first time he actually had the company. It was his company.
I see. Got you.
So his signature on that block, that's like Michelangelo signing his statue. That's pretty neat.
That's amazing. Now, is that cast onto the...
So this whole thing is a casting. So this is all cast. It was one piece.
All right, got it.
So you'll just never see on the road a Bugatti with an original head with a signature in that head.
Right.
That's kind of made of unobtainium, that material.
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat.
That is very cool.
So the carburetor is not the original Zenith updraft, which I have. This is a Winfield racing carburetor.
Okay.
It's the same bore size as the original Zenith was, but this one is adjustable. And since I race it at different racetracks, the ones I mentioned, I wanted the very best technology racing carburetor, and the Winfield was that. Virtually every racing car, from a Formula One to an Indy car, had a Winfield carburetor. And why was that so significant? Because the Winfield carburetor, you could adjust your idle, and you had 16 clicks per revolution of the shaft.
Oh, okay.
I'll show you. So you could adjust your idle perfectly for the altitude that you were. All these race cars had their motor Android, i.e. their altimeter, so they knew what their altitude was. And then it also has an intermediate adjustment, a needle, and it's got a high-speed needle. So there's even, I have one car that has the adjustments on the dash even. So you could even have that.
Yeah.
It looks cumbersome underneath, and I don't want to mess up what the Bugatti looks like. So you adjust the clicks on the idle to 10 clicks. You adjust the intermediate to 18 clicks, and you adjust your high speed to 20 clicks, say.
Right.
And you start there, and you find out where your lull is or your black smoke is.
Yeah.
And you, sooner or later, you get it all adjusted. And when you're all done at 2,000 feet elevation, which is where we are now, you write that down, and you might write the conditions that it's 70 degrees outside.
Sure.
And that one you have contiguous throttle and it's smooth.
And so now you have a setting you can go back to.
You have a set, and you can always go by your plug reading too.
Okay.
But the plug reading is really only at high speed when you're floored, and that's not what you're doing when you're driving.
Right.
You know, you go through all the RPM ranges. So if you have a flat spot somewhere or a coughing, choking spot because you have too much, you have the ability to change that.
Right. Okay.
And Dima Elgin worked for Gene Winfield, and he's 90 years old, and he reworked our camshaft in here with the same camshaft technology as Gene Winfield had back in the teens and early 20s.
Okay.
So he worked 2 years on the camshaft I'm actually using in here right now.
Okay.
So that was an honor to get somebody that worked for the person that made that carburetor that was willing to take on my project to redo the cam on this so it matched the carburetor perfectly, because Mr Bugatti didn't use Winfield carburetors in Europe, but in America all the race cars did. So even though this is a different carburetor than it's supposed to be on here, it's the ultimate teens, early 20s racing carburetor, and it's the right size for the engine. So it's an absolute incredible performance piece.
This is very unusual looking to me, this kind of a chain that's rolling back and forth there.
That's a choke.
Okay, that's your choke, sure. What an unusual looking linkage setup that way.
So that's your choke. The fuel filter doesn't belong. I just have it there just so I can
feel good
see my
about
fuel. Yeah. But everything else you're seeing is real.
Is this a priming cup there?
That's a priming cup. So you can choke the engine two different ways.
Okay.
If you have enough power in your arm, or you put an electric starter on, you can use a choke. But if you don't have enough power in your arm or the other, you can prime it by putting fuel in that. Okay. High octane fuel, you know, a half an ounce of fuel, and that you basically choked it by priming it with fuel.
Right.
So then you hand crank it and it'll start.
Gotcha.
So you have either way you can go. First person method is this, and first person might be a choke, but it's not with the electric starter that we may use.
Right.
But it does hand crank fine. You know,
right on.
that does, you can.
Yeah, and
but
you
it's
can
cold
hear
out
the
there.
compression there too. That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I think we're ready to actually go start it now.
Okay. You did it. There's a hand start. Very nice.
So it does do that. You want the idle down lower when you hand crank it.
Oh, I see.
Because if you have the butterfly up too much, you're not sucking any gas in, you're not charging the cylinder. Hand cranking, so you want the idle lower.
Sure, okay.
So it's up too high right now.
Yeah, there's a reason. It makes sense.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to choke it.
Right.
So now I have choked it. I'm going to leave the timing advanced because since I'm not going to use the hand crank, I'm going to use the electric now.
Okay.
I'm not going to hurt my arm, and the starter can take it.
Okay.
So I'm turning the ignition on, and turning the ignition on is really just turning, unshorting the mag.
Okay.
You're not really turning the ignition on because you don't have ignition.
It's more important as an off button, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more of an off button. And then I'm going to go ahead. I have enough pounds of, I have enough grams of fuel pressure.
Okay.
So now I'm going to hit the starter button. Yeah, there it just flipped.
It happened that fast.
Yep.
Beautiful. I'm gonna.
And you never know how much to choke it, and if you flooded it or whatever.
Right. Yes, you've got to just. It's a little bit of an experiment every time, I'm imagining.
And this gas has been in here for a year, so it's not. We're not prepared for a race right now.
Okay.
But they can see there's the tack. Our battery is good.
Okay.
Our clock, I didn't wind. I could.
Yeah, that's all
Our
right.
altitude, we're at 2,000 feet. We have oil pressure. It's not warmed up, but we'll go slowly.
Okay, yeah, we don't want to hurt anything. Wow. Just realizing we don't have a windshield, do we?
No, never did.
Never did. The blue and the brass. Wow, look at that turning! I love it. Good day for a drive.